notes and reading the SB 1051, and talking to advocates that, especially Julie Fayou, who is a representative from this area, her thought about the owner occupancy requirement of the SDU conversation, or that was in the bill, was that wasn't an optional thing, that was part of the things we needed to do. So I know the city attorney's crafting a memo to address that issue and other things. So I would like to see that sooner than later, so that we could potentially add that in, if that's the case, into the thing that we're doing.
Okay. Thank you. Jennifer?
Oh, thank you. I have an update from the Metropolitan Wastewater Commission, and they do a lot of great stuff. But today I'm going to talk real briefly on their public information program, which has a revamped e-newsletter and Facebook and Twitter, and they're doing treatment plant tours and school programs and just trying to get the word out that they exist and that they are not EWEB. But another great, we are not EWEB. But another great thing they're doing, and if you belong to a community group who would like to have them come and talk, they will come and talk to you, and they will bring these great things. So I have free goodies today for everyone. These are fog kits. They're you use them to get grease, oil, fats, oils, and grease, and you freeze them in your refrigerator because you do not want that going down your drain, because it is very expensive and can also harm your neighbors, and that's not fun. So everyone gets a fog kit. It will remind you to tell all the groups that you belong to have them come and speak to you. I think that's enough for everyone. And that is our current pollution prevention campaign that we are doing. And more to come, hopefully. But
thank you.
That is it.
That's very cool. Thank you. Thank you. Betty?
Oh, thank you. Okay. First, I'll wrap up. Backtracked on the burn ban. We did ban burning completely out in the urban growth boundary, and people brought it up again. So now, if you have more than 2 acres, you can burn. Under 2 acres, you can't burn outside in the burn season. There may be more to be said about that sometime. Also at El Rapa, someone came in, wants us to ban fireplaces, and she said she wants the city to do that. I'm just mentioning that. And I have more complaints about electric bicycles on the bike path. Originally, I voted against allowing those, I know, but I don't know how many people voted for them. But it turns out to be like a motorcycle. It's hazardous. They're hazardous to pedestrians. They go very fast and come up on people without warning. I've been hearing a lot about the grandstand, as you all have, and I'm very sympathetic to the people who want to keep what they have. There are people, as I'm sure you've all seen the same mails, but from people who used to live here and people who live here now and people who live in the neighborhood and people who don't. And I'm very sympathetic to their point of view that we should preserve that part of history. And it always disturbed me that we're doing everything for 2021. I think we should be doing things for the people who are here now and the people who will be here after that, instead of thinking only for. It's like when people say, well, company's coming, we have to do something different. I think the quality of life is important for people who live here now. And if it means that, so what I want to know is, can the city do anything about that?
It's not a CUP process. Because it's zoned public land or it's on public lands, and so there's different rules that relate to that. They still have some requirements to a traffic impacts analysis, and they'll have to do a few design changes that go through the planning process, which actually are approved at the planning manager perspective. So from a land use perspective, there's not lots that can be done around that. I know some people have brought up the issue of historic designation, so I don't know enough about that to know how the city would weigh into that. But we can provide you additional information on both of those topics, and we'll send you something on both of those.
But you're saying the city can't do much. Is that what you're saying?
My understanding is there isn't much that the city can do
Prevent, or can we prevent anything?
My understanding is we aren't able to stop the project, but we'll be able to give you more information, more detailed information.
Information won't help it, though.
I don't think more information is necessarily going to help that, but at least people will have all the same information from which to talk from.
People are concerned, as well as saving the grandstand, people are concerned about the trees that will probably be cut. And I don't know what we can do. Can we do something about that?
I don't know how that works within the regular permitting process, so we can take a look at that too.
But the city does have to give a permit for the tearing down the grandstand or for building a new one, or?
It's a building permit.
No?
It's not in the same way that maybe you're thinking about that, but we'll send you a little bit more information on that.
I'm thinking about it. I'm just thinking.
Yeah, no,
I know that people are extremely concerned. And
right, and so I think what I'd like is for us to be able to send a more detailed information to all the council around all of those particular issues, so everybody will have the same information on that.
I know I've got a cue, but I do want to just jump in because I did talk to Matt Roberts earlier today, and he did say that in the deconstruction of the East Grandstand, they would save memorable pieces of it. They would save specific seats that had numbers on them and other parts of it, and that the tower will have a 6,000 square foot museum dedicated to Hayward Field. So their history will be on site, and it will incorporate pictures and aspects of the field. So it's not the same, but it is, I think there'll be opportunity to understand and honor the history. So just adding that to the mix when we hear from the public forum.
And I still have had some more time before
Right.
that. But that reminds me of a picture of a tree to take the place of a forest.
Chris.
I thought I still had some more time.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were done. I apologize. Carry on.
I didn't. Did I pause to breathe?
You paused so that I interrupted you, so there you go.
Thank you.
Seize the moment.
I wanted to say something about SDUs also. That I don't think everyone got this email, but there's a person who wanted to put an SDU for herself behind her mother's house. And there's some kind of complication because it's on a hill. And the height is measured from, I said this to Denny and he explained it somewhat, or explained it to her. But she asked if there could be a variance. And she was told, and she'd already spent $10,000 for plans to an architect. And she was told that she could apply for a variance, but it would cost her $708.50. And she wouldn't know if it would be granted. And I think that is outrageous that she would have to pay that much just to find out if she could do something. And I wonder if anything can be done about that.
I will have to get back to you on that.
Thank you.
I don't know.
Thank you. That's all.
This time I mean it.
Now I'm through.
Yeah, thank you. Chris?
Time's up, Chris.
That is.
Okay, just three really fast things. The first one is I had an opportunity to meet with the mayor of Ashland, Mayor Stromberg, last week with Reagan, and we were talking about their responses to shelter and homeless and low-income housing. Because the mayor couldn't be there, she was away at her conference, so I stood in as a housing policy board member. It was a really great conversation, and one of the things I discovered was many of the same issues we're experiencing here in Eugene are issues they're experiencing in Ashland. And they want to try to figure out what are some of the strategies that are working for us and what strategies that they're working on that we can benefit from and how collectively we can start coming up with some new approaches. Also, I along with Claire, went to a meeting to reorganize the active Bethel Citizens Neighborhood Group, which has been inactive actually for a while. And what excited me was the number of people that attended and what seemed to be the amount of interest that was being shown in that particular group. They spent time, Rini did a really good job organizing a lot of thinking around what are some of the issues they could work on and what are some of the other activities they could do. And so now they're going to assemble on May 12th to actually have elections for directors and officers. And at that point, then they will be an active neighborhood association, and I know we're all glad to see them back active and involved and re-engaged in their neighborhood. Then the last thing I wanted to mention was with the mayor, I attended the bike share introduction program that took place at the EWEB Plaza. And it was a great event. I got on the bike and rode all around, and they're great little bikes. They have wonderful gearing and brakes, and they work really well. They're very substantial, very heavy, but they're great. And so I think that'll be a really good program, and I'm excited to see it go. So I was glad to see all the people there. I thought it was a wonderful turnout. And thanks to Peace Health for sponsoring so much of that particular program. Yours.
Thank you. Emily.
Thank you. I have an update on our marijuana buffer plans. I had asked if we could just do an ordinance, but thanks to Catherine and our legal department, they made many, many calls to the Oregon liquor people, and we can't do it that way. It has to be a land use code change. But the good news is it can be done very quickly, and so we'll end up with the same result, public hearing and a chance to have it done before our break. Catherine has the exact dates.
So what we anticipate doing is because we have a 35-day DLCD notice that gets built in when we have a land use proceeding, we're looking at getting to the Planning Commission on June 5th, aiming for a July 16th City Council public hearing, which would allow you to take action before you go out on break around the 23rd.
Thank you. So just so to be up, that's the way it's going to work, but nothing else has really changed except we won't have a public hearing first. Planning Commission will. One little sad thing about the Hayward Field is the new structure is so large, it will take up quite a chunk of the U of O rec fields. And I know it's not our bailiwick, but I'd love to see the U of O be more for the students right in the middle of campus instead of basically Autzen Stadium again. And of course, as always, I'm concerned about people sleeping downtown. It's sunny. I probably strolled across at least 6 people just sound asleep on the sidewalk, and regardless of other activities, I find that very distressing, and I know it's upsetting to a lot of people, but we got nowhere for them to lie down, and I'd rather that they lay down on the City Hall lot than the sidewalk or the EWEB land or somewhere, but there's no place to lie down and sleep, and I think it's inhumane. And I think it's a big chunk of why we're having problems downtown. There's nowhere else to go. People have to sleep. City Hall lot. Thanks.
Mike.
Thank you, Mayor. I wanted to say for those that are watching, there is a Cal Young Neighborhood Association meeting this next Thursday night, the 24th. Boy, I hope I got that date right. This Thursday, the 24th at 7 o'clock at the Sheldon Community Center. 26th, forgive me. It's this Thursday night at the Sheldon Community Center at 7 o'clock. There's also another one for North Eugene residents. The Northeast Neighbors will be meeting on May 3rd, the following Thursday night at 7 o'clock at the Gillum Church, north of Ayers Road, or north on Gillum. Betty, I just want to say I agree with you entirely that $708.50 is a ridiculously large amount to find out if you can get a variance. It's equally large and ridiculous as some of the other fees that we charge to build things, in my opinion, as is the consideration of making those expenses higher, which is why I didn't spend Monday night the 9th, the whole time talking about the harm to the community that would come from a construction excise tax. Instead, we broadened that discussion, and I don't want to see us now change, because I was very clear in legislative intent at least twice for a couple of minutes at a time, unfortunately, about what legislative intent was. And I was very clear to point out to the slide that said this is not about just solving that one block of subsidized housing and low-income housing. It's about the entirety of the market, rebalancing the market, and addressing those 3 issues. Now, the CET may come back to us as a part of that discussion, but I don't think we should rush through to that as an obvious solution. I don't think we're there yet. I think that's what the council said, is that we need a broader conversation first. So I on the other hand, would disagree with my friend that I don't think we ought to be scheduling things until we've had adequate time for the discussion. So, thank you.
Well, that leaves you with some uncertainty. So I am just going to say in response to that we are scheduled for May 30th, and we will discuss a process on May 30th about all of the pieces that create barriers and that CET, among other things, are imposed in terms of regulation and fees to the building community, and identify those pressure points and see, and staff will help us with the path forward.
Yeah, I think on the 30th, we'll try to also structure some questions for the council to work through that can provide some additional guidance on the process of how we get to wherever we're going to get within the time frame that the council had set out. So we'll also try to do some of that. Can I just mention, remind people that the new police chief starts on Monday, April 30th, which we're excited about that. So Chris Skinner.
April Fools.
We'll bring him to a council meeting soon after that to just have an introduction here. I know many of you have already met him, but it'll be an opportunity to do that. And then also just a reminder that on Wednesday, May 2nd, between 3 and 5 is this public swearing in and community reception at the downtown LCC building. And so I hope all of you and others out in the community will be able to come and meet Chris. So.
That's great. Very exciting. Be happy to have him on board. Okay, I think we are now done with this, and so I'm closing the council meeting and opening the meeting of the Urban Renewal Agency to talk about the steam plant.
Michael?
Greetings, everyone, on this beautiful spring afternoon. My name is Michael Kinnison. I'm the Director of Community Development, and I'm here with colleagues Amanda D'Souza and Will Dowdy, and we're here to talk to you about the steam plant. If you recall, today's work session is a follow-up to the one we held on March 14th, in which you gave us direction to come back with a proposed process and criteria for disposition of the steam plant. Before we jump into our presentation, I just want to leave you with a few things to think about as we're considering this process and the opportunity that we have here. And then I think at the end we have a short video to show you before we jump into discussion. So everybody is familiar with the steam plant, at least I would think most everybody in town. And it's prominently located on the banks of the Willamette River, clearly visible from Coburg Road, Hilliard Street, and the Autzen Footbridge. And the steam plant is an iconic connection to our community's history. This industrial, this building with its industrial aesthetic, tall, multi-story windows, and Art Deco influenced design draws one in and captures the eye and the imagination of anyone who sees it. Folks often ask me, what's going to happen to that building on the former EWEB property? Everybody has some interest in it. It strikes curiosity in folks. It makes you want to get up close and explore it. It's also a key element of the planned downtown Riverfront development and park. It anchors the southern end of the site, and the steam plant needs to complement the larger adjacent development and add vibrancy to the riverfront. It's unique. There's nothing quite like it in our community. In terms of the type of building, its historic use, and the location in such close proximity to the river. We will never have another redevelopment opportunity like this one, and we want to get it right. We want to do something that the community will be proud of. But let's not be mistaken, it won't be easy. This is not a simple, straightforward renovation. This is ambitious. We haven't really done a redevelopment quite like this before, and there are real challenges to adaptively reusing this building. It's going to require significant financial investment to make it safe and functional, and it's going to require a right mix of experience, creativity, vision, and the financial capacity to make it work. There's certainly a shortage of ideas about what we should do with the building. Many of you, I'm sure, have had conversations, and folks have probably freely offered their ideas. I think every third person thinks it should be a brew pub, maybe the second person a museum of some kind. But there's a number of other ideas that we're aware of folks are thinking about out there. However, vision alone is not enough. We need to find a team with a great vision for the building, but also the capacity to realize that vision. At the same time, we believe it isn't just about finding the highest bidder. We want to maximize private investment, of course, but we think the building is too important to just limit ourselves to who is willing to pay the most for it. We want to stay open to options that may involve partnerships and some level of involvement and public investment, if it is the right option for the community. As you'll hear, we are proposing starting the process with a request for qualifications. Given the ambitious, complicated nature of this project, it's hard to predict what type of response we're going to get. We don't know if we're going to get any viable responses, many viable responses, one viable response. And so, for that reason, we've built in flexibility that allows us to tailor the proposal phase to adapt to the responses we end up receiving. We believe we've created a process that provides the needed structure to collect interest, evaluate concepts, and engage the public to find the right partner. And with that, I'll turn it over to Will and Amanda, and they're going to talk to you about details of the process and criteria.
Thank you. Starting with a little bit of context, this is the Williams and Dame plan, which you are now familiar with. The steam plant is here, down here at the southern portion of the property, which the agency has just purchased from EWEB. The Williams and Dame specifically considered the location of the building in their design process, thinking of it as a visible anchor for the entire site. It has the opportunity to be a complement to the Riverfront Park. Oops, there's the steam plant, and its Riverfront Park is shown here in the red outline. And it's an opportunity to be the destination for the broader community. One detail to call your attention to, this southeastern portion of the building is a later addition. You can see it here. It's a corrugated metal structure, as opposed to the rest of the building, which is is older and the Art Deco architecture. The 2010 master plan, which is up here, the upper right, removed that section of the building and replaced it with an access to the river and a vehicular drop-off. Williams and Dame have followed that in their plan. And that's something that we are staying flexible on as we go forward. If someone wants to follow those plans and remove that portion of the building, if they've got the right idea, that can work. If they want to retain it and adaptively reuse it as well, that can work. Or if they want to remove it and put something else in its place, there's another opportunity.
Some history on the steam plant. The steam plant is the oldest standing structure on the downtown Riverfront property. The 28,000 square foot multi-story building was constructed from 1931 into the 50s and is made of masonry with steel framing. It housed 3 steam boilers and turbines and was used to generate standby electrical power for the pumps bringing water into the original water treatment plant. The operations in the building finally ceased in 2012. Given the nature of the industrial operations that have taken place on the site over the last 80 years, some environmental remediation has been necessary to address human health concerns and to prepare the area for redevelopment. EWEB coordinated much of this work over the past few years, including removal of tanks and boilers and abatement of asbestos in the building. The Department of Environmental Quality issued a determination of no further action on the site, which means there is currently no active risks in the building. The entire downtown Riverfront site is covered by a prospective purchaser agreement, which limits the liability a purchaser faces from prior contamination, and this agreement runs with the land. As you all know, the EWEB Riverfront Master Plan was adopted by the EWEB Board in 2010. It was a result of a significant and comprehensive multi-year public engagement process. The master plan provides only high-level information about the steam plant. It identifies the steam plant as a special place in the Eugene community that should be retained and embraced. The plan encourages adaptive reuse of the building, stating that it can be significantly altered or upgraded, but its original architectural character should remain. And as Will mentioned, it also considers the possibility of removing the newest addition to the building as a part of the reuse. The removal of this portion of the building would be determined in partnership with the final redeveloper of the steam plant. As you know, in the summer of 2021, Eugene will be host to the World Track and Field Championships. Not only will it be the largest sporting event of the year in 2021, it will also give us an opportunity to welcome the world to our community. Given the steam plant's prominence on the riverfront and its unique characteristics, the Riverfront Park and steam plant have the possibility of being an ideal location for an international fan festival and venue for activities associated with the event. The 2021 Steering Committee is aware of and excited about this possibility. As disposition and redevelopment of the steam plant progresses, it will be important for the chosen redeveloper to coordinate with the city and 2021 organizers. Moving on from the background, I'll start to talk more about the proposed disposition process, which is found in Attachment B. As a part of your action last month, the agency board directed staff to work with the river guides and others as we drafted the process and criteria for the disposition of the steam plan. To do so, we solicited info from several groups, including the Downtown Neighborhood Association, the Historic Review Board, the Sustainability Commission, the Mayor's Institute, Williams and Dame, OB companies, the city's Cultural Services Department, and finally the river guides, which I'll elaborate more on. As a reminder, the river guides were appointed by the agency board to advise on activities in the Riverfront Urban Renewal District. The committee met last week to discuss the proposed process and criteria, and they unanimously recommended moving forward with the draft process and criteria included in your materials. The river guides highlighted the role that this building can play in our community, how it's such a unique opportunity to create a new anchor for activity on the riverfront, but also the complexity of its redevelopment. They suggested that the focus of this process should be on achieving an end goal of adaptive reuse. They also clarified which criteria should be used during the RFQ phase and which should be used to evaluate full proposals. And they wanted to be sure the criteria emphasize the flexibility of the criteria, that while we do want proposals to meet as many of the criteria as possible, it's unlikely we'll find a feasible proposal that meets them all. Rather, some flexibility should be exercised when using the criteria to evaluate proposals and in the selection of the redevelopment partner. So as Michael mentioned, our objective in drafting this process was to create structure with built-in flexibility. We are proposing using a request for qualifications followed by a proposals phase. Will is going to talk a little bit more about what would go into both the RFQ and RFP phases when discussing the criteria. So first, if the agency board approves the process and criteria today, we will be issuing a request for qualifications by the end of the week with responses due in June. The river guides will review the responses to the RFQ. If we receive a large number of responses, the pool will be narrowed down for the RFP phase. The river guides will evaluate the responses and recommend which teams should move forward and next steps to the agency director, who will make the decision. Regardless of whether we get 1 or 10 responses to the RFQ, we will need to review and evaluate some sort of proposal for redevelopment. We would have proposals submitted no later than late summer, and the proposals phase is where we've built in the flexibility, which is what I'll talk about on the next slide. Once we get the proposals in, we would start the evaluation process. A key part of this is community outreach to get the public's input on proposals being considered for selection. We expect to build in about a month to gather input from the public, sometime between late summer to early fall. Some opportunities we have already identified are having a presence at some of the Cultural Services Huge Fun events, and also collaborating with the outreach events planned for the Riverfront Park design. After community outreach, the river guides will then evaluate the proposals based on the criteria approved by the agency board and take into consideration the comments received from the public. The river guides will then make a recommendation to the agency director and board as to which proposal to move forward with. After receiving the river guide's recommendation, the agency board will take action on selecting a proposer and directing staff to negotiate terms. We would then come back to the agency board to approve the terms for redevelopment of the steam plant. As I mentioned, the proposals phase is where we built in the flexibility into the proposed process. Given the complexity of redeveloping the steam plant, it's hard to predict what type of a response we are going to get to the RFQ. Thus, we were hesitant to outline the proposals phase at this stage. Depending on the number and quality of responses we get to the RFQ, the proposals phase could consist of a competitive RFP where multiple parties submit responses, a limited RFP if we get only one qualified response for which we would like to see a full proposal, or interviews, presentations, or some other option that has not yet been identified. After receiving the RFQ responses, the river guides will recommend next steps for the proposal phase to the agency director. Regardless of what the proposals phase ends up looking like, the process will end with community outreach and agency board selection of the redevelopment team. So I will now hand it over to Will, who will talk about the draft criteria.
So the idea with the RFP process is that there's an opportunity to reach a better outcome than with a simple sale of property, which the agency could also pursue. The city's Parks and Open Space Division used a similar two-step process for procuring the consultant for the Riverfront Park design. The idea being that the first phase solicits as much response as possible, and then the qualifications are the first evaluation, and then you evaluate based on the vision that the different groups present. So to that end, the first part, the RFQ, is pretty straightforward. The criteria focus on a proven track record of projects of this size and complexity, adaptive reuse, community assets, and working with local and or minority and women-owned businesses. We also want to ask about the final vision that the different responders have, not so much for the sake of evaluation, but to get an initial sense of the various ideas that are in play. So that's why there's an asterisk on that one. I skipped over financial capacity because obviously that's going to be an important consideration to get at the front end. And then lastly, a simple statement of commitment to working with the 2021 steering committee, as Amanda mentioned. So that's the RFQ. Moving forward, the criteria for the selection process, there's a full list is in the attachment to the the attachment to the AIS, and I'm not going to go through all of the different things that are there. But these focus really on the 2010 master plan's guiding principles and design objectives. So that's where these ideas came from. As Amanda said, the river guides emphasize that the selection should not lose sight of the primary objective, which is the successful adaptive reuse of the building. The other criteria focus on use, such as compatibility with the park and surrounding development and a community-oriented destination. Timeliness and feasibility, including a reasonable budget, timeline, and market demands. And public benefit, including things such as environmental and riparian sensitivity, salvage and reuse of materials, and contribution to our creative and entrepreneurial community. Finally, we would like proposals to be compatible with our adopted plans. There's the master plan, the 2004 downtown plan, the Riverfront Urban Renewal Agency plan, the Climate and Energy Action Plan, and of course, Envision Eugene.
So now we get to agency board action. If the process is approved today, we expect to issue the RFQ shortly. Proposals we expect will be submitted no later than the end of summer, and then we would be coming back to the agency board for action on selecting the proposal team in the fall. Today, the agency board's options are to approve the processing criteria as proposed, revise and then approve the processing criteria, or decline to approve the processing criteria at this time. The agency director's recommendation is to approve the RFP process and criteria as proposed. And with that, we will show the video and then open it up for questions.
To connect its urban core with its most prized natural gem, the Willamette River. The redevelopment has several key elements: housing, a world-class park, retail, and dining, all within steps of the Willamette River. While each is important, perhaps
Will, how are you going to handle this one, the video with the...
I'll draw a lot of pictures.
The downtown riverfront, Eugene's long-standing vision to connect its urban core with its most prized natural gem, the Willamette River. The redevelopment has several key elements: housing, a world-class park, retail, and dining, all within steps of the Willamette River. While each is important, perhaps none loom as large as one other critical piece to the development of this 16-acre site, the steam plant.
I see this steam plant as a focal point that everyone will see from the distance and say when they come to the city, "What's that? I want to go see that." And that when they come to this place, there will be something exciting and surprising about it.
The Eugene Water and Electric Board built the steam plant in 1930. As the demand for steam declined, this hard-working building was finally decommissioned in 2012 after serving our community for more than 80 years. History that will not be forgotten. Originally highlighted in the EWEB Riverfront Master Plan for Restoration, the building will be restored to become a key component of the downtown riverfront. The main question, what will it look like? To realize the community's vision and to maximize the building's potential, the city needs creative, out-of-the-box ideas driven by collaboration, innovation, excellent design, and careful renovation.
So we are looking for a team of people who can invest in the history and the legacy and the special Eugene aesthetic that is contained in this extraordinary building that is part of our city's history.
Working together, the city has the opportunity to restore one of its signature and most recognized buildings, a welcoming place to those who once called Eugene home, those who live here now, and those visiting for the first time.
Okay, thank you very much. And so do I have counselors needing to be in the queue? Betty, Claire, Jennifer, Alan, anybody else? Okay, take it away, Betty.
Everybody. I just have a question. Why is the 2021 steering committee involved?
Well, there's been some preliminary conversations that, and some interest in the riverfront, particularly the Riverfront Park, possibly the steam plant, as serving to support and possibly host some of the events around the 2021 event. For example, the fan festival, or those kinds of things. So there's just, right now, there's just some interest and some excitement in folks that are organizing that event. And so we're trying to keep open the possibility that whoever takes on this as a project would be willing to work with folks if that actually does come to fruition.
Now, I heard that, but this is a temporary thing. And
correct.
We wouldn't be designing it for their purposes.
That's not the intention at all. You know, it may be that the building itself isn't really available and ready for that use, so it might be just thinking about how to let the steam plant serve as a backdrop to other things that may happen around the steam plant. Right now, we don't really know what's possible, but we'd like people to start just thinking about that as they submit proposals.
I really don't see why they would be involved still. Thank you.
Okay, Claire.
Thank you. I had a similar question, and I appreciate the response. I don't know if it should be a criteria for the RFQ because of so much uncertainty around it. So I just wouldn't want to preclude someone from offering an RFQ around it because they can't in their mind imagine how they would. I mean, sure, they'll sign a commitment, but maybe, they're just doing it to check that box, and they can't really, their idea doesn't necessarily lend itself to that collaboration. So of all the things that are listed here, that's the one item I feel like, maybe if it was framed slightly differently, a statement of commitment to being open to work collaboratively, or if it was an addendum to the process rather than being one of the criteria, that I would be more supportive of that. Other than that, I find the criteria and the approach that you all are recommending I think it's the right approach. Because of the uncertainty, we can't nail somebody down to something too specific at this point, but these qualities are the qualities we would be looking for in someone who we would want to partner with. And so I think you've, and the River Guides have elevated those qualities that we would want to identify for any organization or company that we would be willing to go into a partnership on this. So other than that one referencing the track and field champions chips, I support what you've listed here.
Jennifer. Yeah, so I was going to talk about the same thing. I think you guys did a great job. I really like the timeline. You guys have really thought this out so well. But this is just too important to worry about whether it's done for one single event. I completely agree with Betty on this. And I think it should just be removed. I mean, if the process is looking good and it's going to be worked out, I mean, the committee can always approach whoever is working on it and say, hey, can we touch base with you? Is this going to work? But it should completely be a secondary, not important criteria at all to this very important, as the mayor so eloquently said in her video, how important this building can be for us. To put this arbitrary timeline on it seems short-sighted.
Alan.
When I think of the steam plant, I think of words like jewel. It's iconic, special, valuable, destination point. I think this could be a very cool project, and I think it has a lot of really high potential. I don't think we should be thinking about this as something we have to do or something that may work. I think this is going to be exceptional in the end. And looking at some of the case studies that we've seen, other people have taken on as big projects as this one and made it into something really neat. I was just back in New York City, and granted they have a lot more a little more resources than we do. They transformed the old National Biscuit Company, Nabisco, was right there down in the Chelsea district in Manhattan, and they transformed it into this incredible market with restaurants and shops and all this sort of stuff, and it was just so cool that they preserved this big structure, and I think that could be something that we could do here with this plant. I mean, you essentially have to build a building inside the building, but it'll be cool. So I support the RFQ process. I think we should get going and move forward.
Mike.
Thank you, Mayor. I actually agree with the underlying goals of what you're trying to do by including that piece of the criteria there. I just think the wording's clumsy for how you explained what we're trying to get out of it. If it said benefit to rather than commitment to work with, I think for me, I'd get that a little bit easier. I'd understand, this is going to help that event in a certain way as well. And I actually don't think that's a small thing. When I was a kid, I went to the World's Fair, the expo in Spokane, in the 70s. I'm not old. And what they were left with after the fact, and I've also, in the summer of 2000, I went down to Atlanta for a convention, and after they'd had the Olympics there. And what those cities were left with after an event of that magnitude, that size, was a facility that helped them with a whole bunch of other stuff and that attracted other things that wouldn't otherwise have been attracted to that community because that they had that capacity with that facility. Now, I know this is not quite so grand, but it might lend itself to something that gives us a benefit we don't understand yet, so long as it's a benefit to what they're going to need in the process of 2021. So I like the consideration. The wording of it's a little clumsy is all I would say.
Any other counselors want to chime in? I just want to explain, both to you and to members of the public, that I was invited to go to this Mayor's Institute on City Design. They invited 7 mayors. I was one of them, funded by the National Endowment for the Arts and the U.S. Conference of Mayors. So it was a free trip, and spent time with really some planning and urban design superstars. So each of the mayors brings a design challenge, and you each have your moment to do your little quick slideshow, and then the other mayors and this panel of experts kind of weigh in with questions and thoughts and responses. And I was first up, so I didn't really know what to expect out of all of this. But I will say that sort of universally, the response was, this is a jewel, this is a just extraordinary opportunity for you. Most cities would be thrilled to have this opportunity, that you're going to develop this whole park space along your riverfront, and you're going to have this steam plant there. There was a phrase they attached to this, which was "go slow to go fast." Slow is fast. That, take your time thinking through what you need to do, and then things will go quickly after that. And I do feel that way about this process that the staff has put together and the river guides have supported. And let's see, I wanted to say one other thing about that. And I think, the idea of this as a beacon really speaks to me, that it's visible and it should be visible on the landscape. And so I think I hear what you're all saying about 2021. We're not, actually everything doesn't just go to 2021 and stop, that we are thinking about these legacy projects and how we benefit, and recognizing that Tracktown and what's happening at the University of Oregon in terms of track is pretty significant in our city and in our region for the foreseeable future. So this is sort of part of recognizing that we have people coming to our community looking for other things to do besides going to a track meet. And so this beacon to the riverfront and to the paths there and to the ride share, the bike share is, oh yes, speaking of other things. But, I think it fits in that whole package of everything we're trying to do, the sort of river districts concept of what we're doing up and down the river, and this seems like a key part of it. So I think it was very exciting to have a whole group of people who know a lot more than I do about urban design say, oh yeah, go for it, this is really good, and take your time to get the right project, take your time to get the right developers for it, because it's really a valuable piece. So thank you very much for that work. And I guess we are... We need a motion, absolutely. Work at hand.
Forgive me, I was looking at this. Sorry. Meeting, not the work session. Sorry, guys, I had the wrong thing. I was jumping ahead in the queue here. Okay, I move to approve the use of an RFP process for disposition of the steam plant using criteria that are consistent with the attachment C.
Second.
Discussion, Claire?
So just a question, given our conversation and then the content of our motion, that seems to me to give some space to reword that one piece to suit more what you heard from council.
Yeah, I think we got the intent.
Okay. So we're not committing you to the exact language that's in this attachment, but to the same elements and intention.
Yep.
Yeah, okay. Great.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, all in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All right, it passes. Thank you very much. That's great. On to the next step. That's excellent. Okay, so I am closing out of the Urban Renewal Agency and reopening a City Council meeting.
I'll turn it over to Jason.
All right. Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Jason Dedrick with the City Manager's Office. Here to give you an update on the Homeless Systems Analysis and Public Shelter Study. We were last here in January. I think it was January 8th of this year with an update, and some things have happened since then. Some what to me are exciting things in terms of movement on this. And so here to just give you an update on that, what's happened in the intervening months. Okay, so just as a little bit of review, last year you made a funding allocation for public shelter. That funding allocation then also facilitated the mayor reaching out to some key stakeholders in the community to talk about what we should be thinking about when we think about a shelter in the community. And that funding, as well as those conversations, then provided a leverage point for Lane County to secure some funding from the state for a study regarding our homeless system overall, as well as possible public shelter. And so they issued a request for proposals. And from there, a consultant has been selected, whom I'll talk about in a minute, and they actually just began their work. They were here on a site visit last week, and so I'll provide you some update on some of what they were working on last week. So just to review, the purpose of this study, to have a better understanding of our complex system of services. So more so than even in some communities where there are only a few players. In Eugene, there are many, many players when it comes to homelessness and other social services. So a study such as this will help to provide us a better understanding of that complex system, how all the services interlink, places where maybe they don't. Also, the purpose of the study is to give us a better understanding of the financial and policy context. Our consultant team has been very clear that a shelter is only successful in a financial and a policy context that works well, and that those are some of the things that can lead to a shelter potentially not working well. So we need to understand that context. Creating a product that community partners can utilize to improve services. So this isn't just a study about a public shelter, it's about our overall homeless delivery system in terms of services. And so we really are, in this joint effort with the county, viewing this as a community product. Everyone can benefit from the information that we're going to learn as part of this. Increased success for any public shelter, that's sort of an obvious one based on those other components. If we are going to go down that road, it's a big investment for our community, and we want to make sure that we know as much as we can about how it can be successful. And then finally, attached to that funding earmark that you made was the direction that the city manager return with a proposal regarding a public shelter, and so this study will help inform that proposal that staff returns with. So the consultant that was selected, we'll refer to them as TAC, but they are the Technical Assistance Collaborative. They're a nonprofit based in Boston. They have about 25 years of experience doing exactly this kind of work, systems mapping in other communities, working on public shelters, working with entities that are the continuum of care in their communities. They have extensive experience at kind of all different levels. So they've worked at the federal level with key federal partners like HUD. They've worked at the state level. They're currently working with the state of Oregon doing a similar kind of mapping exercise. And they've also worked with communities, both large, small, medium-sized like Eugene. So we were very much attracted to the fact that they had worked at all levels on the issue. Again, experience with doing this type of systems mapping in public shelters. And the project staff in particular, in meeting them last week, were impressive to me because aside from their work that they now do at this nonprofit, they actually had worked in local government doing the kind of work that our staff and the staff at the county are doing. So they have a very good understanding of the dynamics involved with this kind of work. They aren't just sort of sitting back as a consultant and don't understand sort of the real world of the work. So I think that's a real benefit with this team. So the components of the study that the consultants proposed were to examine the homeless population in our current system. So that's understanding the demographics. It's understanding everything about the services that we have in our community. And then really the key that everything is tiered off of is this mapping of the current system. And this is done through stakeholder interviews. So they meet with or talk with all of the key entities that are providing these services in the community, understand their capacity, how they're functioning, what their turnover rates are. They talk to folks who are experiencing homelessness, what's their experience moving through our current system. It allows you to understand certain things like what is the current capacity in the system, and they'll look at things like wait lists, how quickly those lists turn over. They are, one of their key components is the idea of flow. the flow of folks through your system who are experiencing homelessness is the key to whether or not you have a system that functions well or not. And if you think of it as sort of as a pipe, there are places in the system where you might have constrictions or where you might have extra capacity, sort of an oversized pipe. And so they're really key on understanding this inflow and outflow as people move through the system. Where are those places where changes might make a difference? Also understanding if there are any gaps in our system, as well as any efficiencies that we can build on or any inefficiencies that we might want to be looking at. The third key portion or third key component of the study is to work on some scenarios. So what they will do is say, well, if a community did this, here's what the impact would be. So that relates specifically to a shelter, but it also says if a key component of funding were directed instead of here, if it were directed over here, they'll have data that can then produce sort of scenarios that will say what will happen under those different things. So I think that'll be a really important way to look at sort of that policy in a financial context. And then finally, they will return with a series of recommendations specifically regarding a shelter. So in terms of the things they will consider as part of a shelter, there are many. This list is just a few of the key ones. So target populations, what are the populations that you want to try to address with a shelter? This is one of those things that's greatly informed by the information they're going to collect. They're going to understand, help us understand our population at a level deeper than what we have now. And so that will really help guide those target populations. The idea of how will a shelter be integrated with other services? Will there be some benefit to co-location of services? That's something that their recommendation will consider. Also consider the coordinated entry system, having a possible shelter be an endpoint for folks into the system, so potentially having multiple resources available. What the operational policies and staffing would be, and this is everything from what should the qualifications of the people who might be on staff at a shelter to what should the hours of a shelter be. So there are many, many things that are encompassed under that item. They will be considering what demand and utilization rates would be based on a shelter proposal. So if it were a certain number of beds versus a different number of beds, they'll be able to map and recommend sort of what the utilization rates would be based on that. Also, the impact of the shelter on the overall system, that gets back to that idea of sort of the flow through the system. Where will a shelter impact the system? What would happen based on that? And then again, those financial and policy considerations. So a simple analysis such as how much a potential shelter might cost and whether or not the resources are available to be able to do that, and what phasing would look like. This component also would look at, are there possibilities for phasing? So TAC was here, two of the key project staff last Wednesday and Thursday. Just to kind of a quick overview of what they did. So they had stakeholder interviews on site with a whole group, with a whole bunch of stakeholders, and I'll show you who that list was here in a minute. And it was really just sort of their first take at that. They also presented to the Poverty and Homelessness Board, as well as a large number of members of the community that were attending that meeting. The mayor was there, so she may have some reflections on that meeting. They also did site visits to a few key facilities in our community. And they also already had a few observations about our community that I thought would be interesting for you to hear. The first was probably something we all can sort of have a gut feeling about, but that we, in their opinion, have a high unsheltered count for our population. And they actually said that was one of the reasons they were interested in working with our community. They said there are any number of RFPs they can respond to in any given year, but they actually felt like our situation was really ripe for them to make a difference. And they like working on projects where they can make a difference. So this to them was something that really intrigued them. They have been struck by the high number of volunteers that we have working at things like Eugene, much more than they see in other communities. So that already after a couple days was something of note for them. And finally, they reflected on the political will of the community, that there seems to be a lot of support for coming up with solutions and doing things. They specifically mentioned the board composition of the Poverty and Homelessness Board as being somewhat remarkable as it comes to in relation to other communities. So some interesting observations already from the consultant team. Here's this list of stakeholder interviews. These were just the folks they were able to meet with on site in person in those 2 days. They will be following up with probably any other entity you can think of via phone over the next few weeks. So the county and city staff have provided them a list of pretty much anyone we can think of, and then they were also asking these groups if there's anyone else they should be meeting with. And the league group, I'll see if I can get you that acronym. That is the, I want to get this right, the Lived Experience Advisory Group for Unhoused Engagement. So that gave our consultant team an ability to meet with folks who have actually experienced homelessness or are currently experiencing homelessness. So they were able to see right off the start sort of what people feel about our current system. So in looking at what your involvement will be coming up, so Mayor Vinnis is on the Poverty and Homelessness Board, and there will be monthly updates probably coming from county staff to that board. So there will be continuous loop there. We are also committed to providing you regular updates in whatever way works best. So that could be memos in your packet, could be emails, could be providing you updates at meetings. So we're open to whatever works best for you. As part of assessing the policy context of our community, there may be an opportunity for the consultant team to interact with you individually for your thoughts there. We are also hoping that when TAC has their draft product early this fall, that there will be some way that we could potentially sync up a trip out here with one of your work sessions so that they may be able to come and present their draft study to you. So that's TBD, we'll see if we can make that happen. So a quick look at next steps. Here's the timeline for the key components of the project. TAC will finish their system mapping in July, so that'll give us our first look at sort of how they feel the system is functioning. Their draft report will be completed in September. That's the time when we might hope to have them here to present their draft report to you. And then a final report in December. And the reason for that gap is they've done this in a lot of communities. They know the type of involvement and engagement that folks like to have between a draft product and a final product. So that could be shorter, but they really want to make sure they leave time for folks to respond to the information they're gathering. Again, the study recommendations will inform the staff proposal that comes back to you. And in terms of community engagement, just a reminder that what they're working on right now is a highly technical product. They're engaging with key stakeholders to ask them how things are functioning, what their capacity is, how many beds they have, what their wait lists are like. So at this point, that level of engagement is really those stakeholder interviews. There will be, we're hoping that, again, that period between September and December, opportunities for folks in the community to weigh in on that draft report. And then obviously whatever happens in terms of developing our own staff report, there'll be opportunities for engagement there as well. All right, that's it.
Great. Thank you so much. And I will just say that at the Poverty and Homelessness Board, I would have picked the same key points as remarkable, which is their comment that we have a high proportion of folks who are unhoused relative to a lot of communities our size, but they were also really impressed with our investment in solutions in terms of volunteers and political will. So that was pretty interesting and hopeful for us, I would say, given how serious it is. So I have Mike and Chris in the, okay, Claire, anybody else? Okay, Mike, take it away.
Thank you, Mayor. Slide number 6, please, sir.
I don't have numbers on, well, it's going to take me a while to get back to it. What one is it? Or what's on that slide, do you know?
Yeah, the recommendations piece.
Okay, let me get back there. Hang on just a second.
Stop.
There we go.
That's the one right there. So talk with me about target populations a little bit more. Can you fill in some more detail about what that means?
Based on the mapping that they will do sort of the overall system, they, in other communities, will often find populations that don't currently have a resource in the shelter options in a community. So they may find that there are no options for youth, or there are no options for families with young children, any number of possible ways that you can segment the homelessness population. They will find some communities that have some things but not other things. So what that mapping will allow us to see is, are there populations that don't have options that then can help inform, are there populations that a community wants to target with a shelter from which there aren't other options available? Or it may be that there's a population that has a high need and there are current options, but it's just not enough to meet the full need. So it really it's a way to use the information to help identify, is there a population the community wants to target based on the data?
One of the things that I think we fall down on as a city is not talking in more detail about the targeted differences in people who who find themselves temporarily or otherwise in the condition of homelessness. I believe, based on talking for years with people on the front lines of this, with our first responders, with our police officers, our firefighters that deal with this day in and day out, that conditions that people find themselves in while they're in the condition of homelessness drive a great deal of what sort of services they need, whether or not they're going to be stuck in that place, whether they want to be out of it or whether they don't. So my hope is that when, there are those who have issues around drug and alcohol use, there are those with mental health conditions, there are those who might have, massive family emergency of a medical nature that wipes them out. Different causes bring people into that state. I'm hopeful that we have that kind of discussion too, because I think that leads to better actual solutions. I think the Poverty and Homelessness Board and Pat Walsh and others that I've talked to about this use language like, for those that seek wellness in their world and in their life, what can we be doing to provide more help to them and curtailing the enablement of those who don't want to get well. And so I'm hoping that, yes, this is about the building, but it's also more about a package of services and who does what around it. Secondarily, I would hope that the one farther down there, since we're looking at this regionally and systemically, that I hope they're going to delineate for us which parts of solutions are whose jobs from their perspective. The cities, the counties, the city of Springfields, or otherwise. I hope they're going to be very specific on who can be the best partner to address which particular kind of job. Thank you.
Okay, Chris.
Thank you. I'm incredibly pleased that we're going to pursue this study. I mean, any strategy is successful if it's based on intelligence. If you have information ahead of pursuing the strategy, you can be much more likely to be successful in pursuing the strategy. And even over and beyond that, I think it's important that we replace assumption, prejudice, belief, myth with facts, figures, knowledge, and best practices as a way to really try to make our strategy successful. I have to really give a lot of recognition to Steve Minella, who's been wanting this project for years. I remember talking with him about this a long time ago, and I'm really glad that through his efforts and also in working with the Poverty and Homelessness Board and the conversations we've had about shelter, this is actually beginning to happen, because I don't think a shelter conversation and the operation of that shelter and fitting it into the larger continuum of homelessness to self-sufficiency is really going to be successful without this kind of knowledge and information. And to the point about target populations, I think that is one of the most critical pieces, because I think there is a different way you have to approach each different population. And you talked about a couple of them, but I think in this area we have some particularly difficult and troublesome populations that defy easy solutions unless we know a lot more about them. And I'm specifically referring to chronically homeless populations. The situationally homeless can often take advantage of services. They're understaffed and underpaid, but they exist and can often utilize them. But chronically homeless people, there's not a lot of services for them because they defy being able to be helped by a lot of those services. And if this shelter, through the work of these people, can identify some ways that you can have a shelter and the kind of supportive services that can deal very specifically with that chronic population, that's where you begin to have actual structural change. And that, to me, is extremely exciting, because you can nibble around the edges with situationally homeless folks and a little here and a little there. But unless you begin to make real headway on the chronic population, you're always going to be nibbling around the edges. And so I really look forward to if these folks are as experienced as you say they are, their ability to really hone in and say, what are the best practices and services and structures you can create that can help very difficult populations begin to get some sort of help. We can't help them all, but this can maybe help us approach a lot more of them and provide support.
Claire.
Thank you. Well, I'm very encouraged by this update. I wasn't able to make it to the Human Services Commission meeting last Monday, but I believe they got a similar update as part of that meeting. And I'm just also very grateful to this council and the budget committee for supporting the motion that dedicated the $1 million of funding that has helped us get this project started in a real way. As Chris mentioned, it's something that many folks in this community have had in mind for a long time. And I just want to remind us, too, that this will be a collaboration with our partners at the county. And so as we get closer to having a staff proposal, it will be important for us to be thinking about how we do that work together as the city and the county, because this is a big project. And then I absolutely agree with what I was hearing from my fellow counselors about thinking about our target populations. I think that's a really critical piece of providing a service that's actually going to meet a need. And personally, I hope they were able to speak with folks of some of the kind of folks that Emily mentioned in her items of interest who are sleeping downtown on our downtown streets. I am personally interested in establishing a low barrier emergency shelter that can be an alternative to sleeping on the sidewalk or the vacant City Hall lot. I personally believe that's the gap. That's a big gap that we have in our current services, so I'm very eager to see what TAC comes up with their recommendations and see if that kind of aligns with my own perception just with my 10 years of service on the Human Services Commission. Thank you.
Alan?
Yeah, thanks. I'm glad we're doing this study as well. Can you go back one slide? Yeah, that one. I'm interested in a little bit more detail about the map of the current system and how they're going to do that and what gets entailed in doing that. That's kind of the heart of this, I think. And did they also look at the costs associated with this? Is that what's meant by efficiencies and inefficiencies?
Correct, yes. Looking at that, as well as a piece of that also comes out during the scenarios portion, where they can look at, once they've sort of developed that system, it allows them to be able to forecast sort of an investment here would do X to the system. In terms of the mapping, it's both it's kind of a text and data exercise, but it's also intended to be a visual exercise as well. So we are hoping to come out of this with something that actually is a physical, a graphical depiction of sort of the system for our community that makes it more approachable for everyone to understand just what all the pieces are, how they interrelate, and how it works. So I don't know if that answers everything. I could certainly get more information on what in detail they do during that mapping process.
That would be helpful. And, Reagan watched us put together a great piece that has like 31 different programs that we're working on homelessness and affordable housing. And so this takes that as the starting point, and then it's a little bit more sophisticated, talking about our capacity, looking into the details of each of those.
Correct. Yeah, and it'll overlay everything else that's in the community outside of just the city programs or the county programs. All of our other partners in the community as well will then be part of that
That's kind of looking at what we're doing, and then looking at the shelter and in a combination of how that all fits together, because it's not an isolated program or system, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks.
Anybody else? Oh, Greg, go for it.
Thanks, Mayor. I have to be a little more skeptical about this in the context that what is our end game of coming out of this with a document, a report that will tell us what we already know, or is this going to inform us in some other way to be able to take action with limited resources and limited funding? I think we all know what the problem is. We don't have we have no money to do this. And we have been through other analysis before, just recently, where folks said, well, City Council, we want you to fix this, but we're not willing to pay for it as a community. So, we all know that, $1 million doesn't go as far as it used to. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money to everybody here at the table. But, I mean, seriously, in terms of really grappling with this is not going to, make a real huge dent. What is the end game? What do we want to see come forward after December 2018? Based on whatever evidence and inclination that they give us, because I just don't see a functional way forward without having identified more resources and being able to reallocate and repurpose resources that are probably, well, I'm not going to say that they're not being properly used. I said, maybe they're not being used as efficiently as they can be used, but I think that most of our providers in this area are using their resources up to their maximum capability. So I'm struggling here with where exactly is this going to go? Are we paying for another, 2-inch folder, 2-inch binder of paper that's going to sit on a shelf?
Obviously, it's hard for me to speak to what the end game is, but I can tell you that one of the things that will be part of their recommendations will be, there may be a series of recommendations around a shelter, and the shelter could look different under each recommendation. They will tie funding options and opportunities to each of those to say, if you have a shelter that's structured, for example, with a certain set of services, it opens you up to a certain set of state or federal funding versus another type of shelter might open you up to other types of funding. So part of the information might help inform your decision around financial viability of different options and what funds might be available outside of just what's in our community. So that's a piece that could help you get to the end game. And I'm presuming we're going to find some things out about the system that we don't currently know, because there are things that sort of, when someone sits back and is able to see the whole picture at a deeper level, that we haven't really, at least to my knowledge, done before. We'll probably learn a few things we don't know. So I think the information will help inform choices around the end game, but I can't say what is the end game.
I guess that's fair for the moment.
Claire, did you want another round?
Yes, please. I just wanted to add, I appreciate Jason's response. I think, we'll get a product that will identify some potential projects that we could pursue that would, according to their analysis, be feasible just in terms of, potential size and scope and services. And then, yes, we will have to, as a community, look for additional resources or redeploy current resources in order to build and operate. So I don't think anyone's under the illusion that we have some big piles of money to do that. That's going to be part of the hard discussion about what we do next. But I think without this kind of professional analysis and kind of deep dive into what we currently have and where are the underserved pieces and what would really actually fly for our community, I think that's going to be really helpful. And then we'll have a product and a goal and something we can work towards in terms of, well, we need more funding now. What are the next questions we need to ask of ourselves?
Chris?
Yeah, I think the kind of point that Greg raises is a good one in terms of how we should approach a project. And I've, after a number of years, have watched processes that, because they tried to solve the entire problem in one giant magic solution, produce those 2-inch thick reports that wind up on shelves because they're simply too big, too ponderous, and too expensive to pursue. And so I've come around to a way of thinking that if you really do want to be successful in pursuing a strategy, you have either got to divide it up or approach it in a manageable, actually achievable scale. And so I think directly to that point, whatever this project is and whatever comes out of this project, in order to make it something worthwhile, we need to approach it as what are the defined specific things that we can do, sometimes within our resources and sometimes not, but not try to solve the entire problem of homelessness with one report. The bookshelf will collapse under the weight of it, and nobody will ever read it. I mean, I think that's a very valid point. So I think going into it, and hopefully their experience will also advise the same thing, you come at it as a series of smaller, manageable, achievable outcomes that collectively get you to where you want to go. Because I'm really afraid of the too big project. Because I think we've tried too many times to do the too big project, and the too big project just never quite happens. And so I'm much more inclined to say, let's be realistic. What can we do? Maybe it's a small thing, but we do 5 of them, and then we actually get something done. I think that also brings more partners in, people who are willing to say, I like that piece, I'll work with that piece. And someone else says, I like that piece, I'll work on that piece, and you may get the resources that way as well. So I think it's a good point, and I think if we know about it and think about it ahead of time, we could try to craft something that is more workable.
Any other comments? So, and I would just add to that I think that remember that this emerged because there was such a demand in the community for us to have a shelter. Council set aside the funding. We asked staff to, move forward towards that, and so this data collection is a direct response to council's direction, really, to do our homework on this subject. But I think that this report not only will inform how we respond to the possibility of shelter itself, but how we look at our system overall in terms of making those very, discrete decisions about how we prioritize our spending in order to address this population. So, I think there's a longer term, there's the shelter conversation, and then there's the whole conversation. I think this will inform it all. So thank you very much for a very clear report. And I think we are done 2 minutes early. See you in half an hour.